tenemos el placer de cederle la palabra. Muchas gracias.
Well, I'm very flattered that you should, this conference of eminent semioticians, should wish to begin by inviting an author to speak. The author, as we know, is dead. And impairs somewhat his speaking ability. Anyway, there's no reason really why authors should be at all good at this kind of thing. Many of them are not, and in about 45 minutes or so you may agree. In fact, it's quite a recent practice. You know, authors used to stay quietly at home and send their books out to work. And this business of authors coming out to talk to readers and scholars and so on, students about their work is relatively a recent thing. And if it was not invented by Charles Dickens, it was enormously popularized by him on his famous speaking tours of the United States. Dickens was good at inventing this kind of thing. One of his other inventions, Christmas, seemed to catch on. And he certainly was responsible for creating the modern concept of the public speaking role of the author, certainly in the English-speaking world. In fact, the trouble with it is that it was bad for him. It actually probably contributed to his early death, because his second lecture tour of the United States, later in his life, was a very hectic schedule, and he would perform, not so much as speak, he would perform the sort of greatest hits from his books and do all the characters in different voices. And his performance of the death of Little Nell from the Old Curiosity Shop was supposed to be the kind of pièce de résistance, and the fact that Little Nell had a long Dickensian beard didn't seem to upset anyone. So he did this with great aplomb and effort, and when he went back to England, it had a very bad effect on his health, because he had overtired himself, and he fell ill and never really recovered, and subsequently died. So the moral of this story is that some writers are good at this, but it kills them. So here I am, you see, risking my own life. Maybe not for the first time. To talk about this strange age that we live in, and what is the function of literature, and how does it interact with the world in which we find ourselves. And thinking about Dickens reminds me that traditionally, at the height of the novel, one of the roles of the writer was literally to bring the news that people would discover through great works of literature, things about their own societies which they otherwise did not know. So that, for instance, when Dickens wrote Nicholas Nickleby, exposing the terrible abuses to which poor children were subjected in the poor schools of the north of England, that really was information for many of his readers, and played a part in the passing of educational laws outlawing many of those practices. A direct effect, if you like, on the society in which he lived. There's a famous story about the meeting between President Lincoln and Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, in which Lincoln said to her, when he was introduced to her, he said, "Oh, so you're the little woman who started this big war." And you can see that there's some truth in that, because the power of that novel and the way in which it mobilized people's ideas about the slavery question was a definite contributing factor to what happened. Nowadays, the conventional wisdom is that this is no longer one of the functions of literature, because there are so many other ways of getting information. The news-bringing function of literature, people would say is if not at an end, then it's enormously curtailed. I'm not sure this is true, really. Partly because I think that although it's true that there is an enormous increase in the quantity of information media, there has not been a corresponding increase in the quality of information media. In fact, you might well say that it's an inverse reaction, that the more information there is available, the lower is the quality of that information. And you can watch the news, you know, as we now know, round the clock, without really finding out anything. First of all, it's because the news seems relentlessly concerned with trivia. You know, if you live in New York, it's possible to believe that the most important people in the world are Paris Hilton and Britney Spears. And everything else comes a very long way second. So that's a part of the problem, is the trivialization of the information media. Another part, of course, is the crisis in the old print media, the kind of, you know, what seems clearly to be the coming death of newspapers. Nowadays, certainly in the United States, you find that the New York Times is basically surviving on the largesse of the Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim. The Washington Post only survives because it has other non-journalistic businesses that compensate for its enormous losses. How long they can do that is questionable. Every single other major newspaper in the United States, the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Miami Herald, the Boston Globe, are all on the edge of extinction. So we face an imminent future in which there simply may not be newspapers of the kind that we have been used to for so long. And the problem is that up to this point, the new media, the electronic media, have not showed themselves capable of producing information at that level of that quality. The news media are very good at, the electronic media are very good at offering commentary. And there are numbers of news websites, current affairs websites, which offer commentary as good as you will find in the traditional print media. What you don't have is investigative journalism. There is not a single website in the world that has been able to maintain staffs, the kind of journalistic staffs that would be required to actually go out into the world and find things out, and to perform, you know, the important democratic function of the press, to be that which it inquires into and questions the functionings of power. The loss of that is going to leave a very large hole, and no doubt in the future one can surmise that maybe the internet will begin to produce such organizations, proper news gathering organizations, but so far they do not, and so we can unfortunately look forward to a kind of hole, a loss of knowledge rather than an increase of knowledge. So it may be that those of us who write books still have, or may have, in fact, an enlarged function in the near future, in terms of simply offering people information about the world in which they live, because many of the media which have offered them that information are seriously